undying. That is what they called her. Not a title. Not a legend, a warning. They said fire did not burn her. They said fire obeyed her. And in a world where the sun was God, the rain was king, and the earth was ancestor, a woman who commanded living flame should have been impossible. So why did every elder remember her name? Her name was Ashaara. And this is not the story they wanted you to know, long before memory was written. Long before maps were drawn and borders were decided by strangers, there was a land that lived by fire and breath. The people who walked this red earth did not beg the sky for mercy, they spoke to it. They knew the name of every wind. They read the shape of every cloud. They understood that nature was not a force to be controlled. It was a conversation. Elders sat at the threshold between the living and the unseen. Shrines breathed with offering, kola nut, palm oil, the memory of blood spilled in honor. Warriors did not go to war without asking the land for permission. And at the center of this world, the sun was not a star. The sun was a being. A presence that watched, that judged, that sometimes chose. According to oral tradition passed through the Sahelian storytelling lines, and it must be said clearly, this is the realm of myth and ancestral memory, not recorded history. There was a people who called themselves the Kaabu of the inner flame. The Kaabu is a real historical empire of West Africa. What follows draws on mythological tradition and fictional narrative inspired by real spiritual frameworks, including Yoruba, Fon, and Saharan fire worship oral accounts. It is presented as story, not as documented history. Among these people, fire was not merely heat. Fire was memory. Fire was the voice of those who had already passed. And once, only once, some believed the fire chose a body to live inside. A human body, not a woman's body. They say she was born at noon. Not the soft gold of early afternoon. Noon. When the sun is directly above, when shadows disappear. When the earth has nowhere to hide. Her mother, the story goes, screamed once, and then the heart fell silent. Because the child did not cry. She arrived already watching. They named her Ashaara. In the tongue of her people, the name carried two meanings. She who carries light. And she who cannot be extinguished. Both, it would seem, were true. From childhood, the accounts say, and these are accounts passed through generations of griots, so we hold them with reverence and careful distinction. From childhood, fire behaved differently around Ashaara. Flames leaned toward her. Not away. Toward. The village fire, left untended through the night, would still be burning by morning if Ashaara had slept near it. Elders called it a gift. Rivals called it a curse. And children were simply afraid. But Ashaara was not a monster. She was not a witch, not a demon, not a punishment from the ancestors. She was, by all tradition preserved in story, a warrior, feared yet respected. Misunderstood yet necessary. Because the gift of fire is also the burden of fire. And Ashaara would carry both. When the dry season came and did not leave. When the river shrank to a thread and the harvest turned to dust. When the neighboring kingdoms began to press at the borders, sensing weakness, the elders met. They debated through the night. What offering had been forgotten? What ancestor had been dishonored? What wrong had the people committed to deserve such silence from the sky? And then one griot, old, half-blind, but clear-voiced as iron, spoke a name. Ashaara. The council fell silent. Some say the fire in the center of the circle rose 6 feet at the sound of her name. Some say it is simply what fires do in good stories. Perhaps both are true. The tension in the council was old, not born of this drought alone. There were those among the elders who believed Ashaara's power was sacred, the direct link to the fire deity, a blessing upon the lineage. And there were those who believed she was dangerous. Not because she had done harm, but because she was uncontrollable. And in any society, ancient or modern, power that cannot be controlled is power that frightens those who hold power. This is where tradition and truth begin to split. The council decided Ashaara would lead the warriors to the border, not as an honor, as a test. If she returned victorious, she was sacred. If she fell, she was never meant to be remembered. Ashaara accepted. Because she understood what they did not. Fire does not negotiate. Fire simply burns. Now, stop. Because this is the moment the story becomes uncomfortable. we must ask the question that every version of this tale has tried to avoid. Was Ashaara's power celebrated or controlled? Think about it. A council of men, deciding the fate of a woman whose power they could not understand. A test designed not to honor her, but to dispose of her cleanly, if necessary. Was this sacred tradition protecting the people? Or was it fear wearing the mask of wisdom? Throughout ancient African history, and there is documented evidence of this in kingdoms from Dahomey to Maro, women of extraordinary power were often granted ceremonial title, while real authority was quietly removed from their reach. The Dahomey Agoji were warriors of terrifying skill, revered in ceremony. But the stories told about them by those who feared them were very different from the stories told by those who stood beside them. Ashaara belonged to the tradition of the extraordinary woman made into symbol, when what she truly was sovereign. Was this sacred truth or controlled belief? That question, I leave with you. But what happened next leaves very little room for debate. Drop your thoughts below. Was Ashaara's power honored or controlled? And does this still happen today? The battle came at dusk. The invaders were many. The fireworkers of the inner flame were few. By the account of the griots who carried this story for generations, and again, this is oral tradition, not a transcribed record, the invading force broke through the first line of defense before midday. Warriors fell. The earth drank. And then, something changed. Ashaara stepped forward. What happened next depends on who tells the story. Some say the dry grass of the battlefield ignited, forming a wall of living fire that bent, like a hand, directing itself toward the enemy and away from her people. Some say she simply fought, brilliantly, fearlessly, and that the fire accounts are the language a culture uses when it cannot explain a woman who should not have survived but did. Perhaps both are true. But what is consistent across every version of this story is this: she returned, and that is where the truth begins to fade. Because when Ashaara returned to the council, victorious, unburned, undeniable, the story we find in the oral record is not a story of celebration. It is a story of silence. The council honored her in ceremony, gave her a title, built her a shrine, and then, quietly, erased her from the council's memory. The story we know today is not the story they lived. The story they lived had a woman at its center. The story that survived had a flame. Here is the question that does not leave me. If Ashaara had been a man who commanded fire, would the story have survived differently? If she had been a king, would there be a throne in her name, a dynasty, a carved genealogy on palace walls? We have seen this pattern before. Hatshepsut of Egypt, one of the most successful pharaohs in recorded history, had her image chiseled from monuments after her death, her name removed, her reign attributed to others. Asantewaa of the Ashanti, who led a military resistance that humbled a colonial power, was remembered in her own land, but written out of the colonial record entirely. So when a fictional oral story, one that allegedly spans several generations of Sahelian griot tradition, positions a fire-wielding warrior woman at the center, and that woman is then honored with a shrine but removed from council, is that just a story? Or is that a truth wrapped in the only form that was allowed to survive? Some believe oral tradition is not fantasy, that it is memory, compressed into image and metaphor, because the written record was never meant for everyone. The fire in Ashaara's story may be literal. It may be metaphorical. It may be both, but the erasure, that is undeniably real. We have seen it too many times to call it coincidence. I want to ask you something directly, and I mean this genuinely, not as a prompt, but as a real question from someone who thinks about these things deeply. Should a story like Ashaara's have been preserved? Or is there wisdom in what the council chose, keeping the power of the story alive in metaphor, so it could not be destroyed by those who would have used a name to discredit it? Was the silence protection? Or was it fear dressed as care? Tell me in the comments, because there is no single answer here. And the best stories are not the ones that tell you what to think, they are the ones that force you to decide. What do you believe? Was Ashaara's story hidden to protect her, or to erase her? Drop one word below, protect or erase. And if you know a woman in your family whose story has never been told, her name belongs in the comments too. There is a shrine, they say, not marked on any map, not listed in any colonial survey, but known, passed from elder to child to grandchild, in the villages near the old Sahelian trade corridors. A small flame, kept alive. And the old ones who tend it will tell you, if you ask gently and with respect, that they do not know exactly who the flame was for. Only that it must not go out. Only that it was a woman. Only that she was the sun-born. Perhaps Ashaara never existed exactly as this story tells it. Perhaps she is many women, compressed into one, every warrior, every healer, every leader whose name was not kept in the written record, whose power was too great for the comfort of those around her. Perhaps that is why the story survives at all. Because myth is not the absence of truth. Myth is the last place truth hides when history tries to kill it. Ashaara the Sun-Born. Not erased. Just renamed. Called fire. Called legend. Called myth. But still, burning. If this story moved you, if something in it felt familiar, even though it is old and far away, then I want you to know something. This channel exists for one reason. To find the stories that were never supposed to survive. The African stories that were buried under other people's versions of history. The kingdoms that were real. The women who were erased. The spiritual traditions that were called superstition, by people who feared what they could not control. We bring them back. Not as entertainment. As remembrance. If you believe these stories matter, subscribe. Because there are so many more where this came from. Stories of real kingdoms. Real warriors. Real spiritual traditions that shaped the world and were never given credit. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like Ashaara's, share this. Because some stories don't die, they wait. Not extinguished. Just waiting to be found.